What's happening? Kyle Postlethwaite, aka Malcare here at Big Kitty Games, also known as my house in the Japanese wilderness. Just wanted to go over a few different subjects actually. I don't script these videos and I usually don't edit them unless I get like a coughing fit or something. But I did want to kind of give what this is going to be about before I get into it because my videos usually turn out to be a little bit long. So first, I'm gonna go over the past 2 weeks, what's been going on. Two, what the kind of the money situation, how that's going. Um, three, getting ready for freelancers. Hopefully at the start of next month, August 2022, and the survey results. I forgot to pull those up, but I can do that. And um, five, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about my long-term goals for just kind of how I see Solace Crafting evolving over time, kind of what my grander vision for the game is. And the survey results kind of play nicely into that. So I think that that should be interesting. Let me just get the ready there. So anyway, past 2 weeks, basically I came back from my visit in the States to see my friends and family. I do that every year in August. It's 2 weeks over there, and it is a 23-hour journey from door to door. Um, I think there are still direct flights, but for some reason, the tickets were just crazy expensive this year. I don't know why. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world, but like the plane from Tokyo to Hawaii, I had a layover in Hawaii, um, and it was like totally empty. Like everybody was just grabbing a middle lane and laying down for 8 hours. It was weird. I don't know why it would still be so expensive with that, but anyway. Um, but yeah, I got back from that. Was pretty jet lagged for a couple days there. Really didn't get much done that first week, but I had over 1,000 emails. Um, I don't think I made a video about this. I just did a little post about it. But yeah, lots of private messages on Facebook, on Instagram, on Discord, on Steam. And I'm still going through some of that stuff. And the survey results too. Got 347 survey results or something, which is really cool. And a good 130 of those had like specialized, comments, not just responses, but actual, there was the open-ended questions, or ability to leave your own remarks kind of thing. So I still, absolutely want to go through those, and just been a lot going on to the point that last week I kind of just ran out of steam and ended up helping my wife work on some stuff. She co-hosted an event here on Saturday. But anyway, didn't get any game development done. It was just all like management and preparation and stuff that's really not very fun. But it's Tuesday afternoon here now. Monday, I was able to get a number of bugs fixed, and we fixed some problems with the Big Kitty Games server. Or rather, we kind of patched it in a way that it will now no longer crash in a way that it's unable to recover from. And I did kind of want to go into that just real quick, how we found out through players playing on the server, which has vastly increased since 1.0 release, just the amount of people playing online at the same time and stuff like that. One player was trying to push out into the wilderness, which is kind of one of the things you can do in the game, and ended up getting to 4,200 kilometers, which sounds a little weird to some people, but yeah, you can actually go however far you want. We've had players get all the way up to 1,000,000. But for some reason, that's breaking the dedicated server. And I kind of know why, kind of don't. I know the source of the problem, but I don't actually know what it is that is breaking. I do have an error report to look into, yada, yada, yada. But I thought I'd explain that real quick because it just seems like there's a lot of people that kind of interested in that topic. So it's called floating point precision. And then if you append error onto the end of that, that's what we're talking about, floating point precision errors. So basically in coding, you've got a bit, which is a 1 or a 0, and it can only represent 1 or 2, or 0 and 1, basically. And then if you've got 2 bits, can you see me? You can now do a 1 and a 0 and another 1 and a 0. So you've got a power of 2, you can go up to 4. Another power of 2 goes up to 8. Another power of 2 goes up to 16. And if you get up to 8 bits, you get what is a byte. And that is 0 to 255. So 256 total. And then your basic integer is actually 32-bit. And it goes up to, I meant to look that up before I started here. I think it's like 42 billion or something. Let's see. Okay, it's 2 billion, but yeah, this is unsigned, so it's 44.2 billion is about what that number goes up to, 2 to the power of 32. But that's an integer, right? So you can't have decimal points. You can't do 0.5 or anything like that. So a floating point number has decimals. And then the way that they work is different in that they have what's called accuracy, where you've got a decimal and then you can say 1024.003. So what that means is that I've got 7 digits or 7 points of precision. So I can actually move that decimal down and say 1 million, yada, 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 and then 0.000, because that's 7 points of data. If I move the decimal all the way up to 1.654321 or whatever, again, that would be 7 points of data, 7 points of precision. So when you're talking about a player that is at 4,200 kilometers out in the world, that is 4,200,000 meters, right? So you're using up all 7 points of precision on that. You're no longer able to calculate decameters, let alone centimeters, let alone millimeters. You lose that amount of precision because you're using such big numbers. This doesn't happen in single player because you have a floating point correction system programmed into Solace Crafting, where if you pass a threshold that's actually 8,192 meters, which is another power of 2, the whole world shifts. So it pretends like you're back at 0, 0, but the whole world has shifted 8 kilometers so that the math can be brought down to smaller numbers again. And this happens regardless of how far you go out. If you're ever more than 8 kilometers from the center of the physics engine, the whole world will shift to keep you towards a 0, 0 position as far as the math is concerned, right? But anyway, dedicated servers are not currently capable of doing that. And they do need to be eventually at some point, but it's a really complicated system because you have multiple players running around in multiple directions, right? So when it's in single player, you can just shift the whole world and say, now it is here. But if you say, player A is 16 kilometers north, so let's shift the whole world 16 kilometers to the south so that the math works for them. Well, what happens to player B that is 16 kilometers to the south? Now their world is going to feel like it's 32 kilometers to the south because you've added a negative shift onto theirs. So you have to actually handle things in these like pocket dimensions where anybody close enough to this player gets handled off in this section of math, and you can layer them pretty nicely. And it's absolutely possible, and there are games that do it. And it's something that I will at some point have to do. It's just a complicated thing to try and have these separate running engines of math based on how many different pockets are required to keep the math working properly. If you kind of get what I'm saying, it's complicated and really hasn't been necessary. And so currently, dedicated servers basically don't use any system at all. They just let players run free. And if this was in single player, it would be a huge problem because you'd have a player camera that would no longer be able to calculate the difference of centimeters and eventually decameters and eventually meters. And you can actually see this in some games, like if you fall off the world and it just lets you keep falling, you'll get further and further from zero, and your fingers will start, vibrating and getting weird. You've probably seen that in a game once or twice. That is the floating point precision errors, where the rendering engine no longer knows if your finger is here or if it's over here. It can't actually figure that math out, and it has to guesstimate. And so everything starts to vibrate really weird and funny. But a dedicated server doesn't actually use a camera, so it doesn't have to do visual calculations like that. It is still going to create physics errors, but again, we're talking about centimeters and millimeters and stuff for 99.9% of players. If you're at like 100 kilometers out, it's no longer going to be able to calculate millimeters or something like that. So if your arrow misses by a millimeter, it might actually hit, but nobody really cares about that level of difference. We're not some PvP super, high-paced shooting game or anything weird like that. So it works for, again, 99.9% of the time. But there is something that is causing a problem at 4,200 kilometers or more that I need to look into. And I don't know if it's just the noise, math is getting out of hand or what. But it was causing threads to not close properly. So the process of this dedicated server would actually die and finish, but there were background threads still running that would leave the process sort of stuck, and then a new server would try to start up immediately, recognizing that the first process had died, but the ports wouldn't be closing properly, so the new server that starts up would be unable to open ports, and the whole server just wouldn't work anymore. Thanks to some help with some Linux buffs in our Discord server yesterday, I was able to get a better system implemented so that the server now works. Even if it does crash in that kind of an instance, somebody going out way too far, the ports will properly close and it will properly reboot at least. And I'll probably want to implement some kind of a limitation to not let people go past 4,000 kilometers as far as multiplayer is concerned, until I fix the bug if possible, but then more long term, of course, set up the pocket dimension floating point precision error correction system. But that will take some time, and really just isn't high priority because, again, it's not something that 99.9% of the players run into. Most people just don't go out that far, especially in multiplayer. Yeah, and so besides that, I'm just kind of going through the bug tracker primarily. It's actually become really difficult for me to try and track stuff in Discord. There's just too many messages. I'm likely going to turn on slow mode, I believe it's called, where you can only post a message once every like 30 minutes in the bug discussion section, and I'll change it to bug reports. So you can like post a line, and you can edit the line and, add more detail, change your thing. But it's really not good when people get into these lengthy discussions about bugs in there, because then I can't find what someone was actually trying to point out in the first place. Or it makes it much more time consuming for me to try and go through that when there's 50 plus messages every day. So the bug tracker is great for that. Much easier to go through if you are interested in me looking at something. But yeah. That's what's going on, what has been happening, and part two here, I want to get into kind of the money situation and getting ready for freelancers, but something that kind of relates to that. Well, I'll get into that when I get there. But anyway, so with the money situation, August went great. All things in perspective for me, as far as, I'm concerned, what the kind of money I need to keep my head in this game to keep doing this, went great. I didn't make $1 million or anything like that, but certainly made a decent amount of money to add some financial security to everything. And, well, I kind of already went into that previously, but I was living pretty poor for the past like 18 months, and it was pretty stressful. And I'm still kind of recuperating from that. And I actually haven't, again, been paid any money from Steam yet. That happens at the end of this month. So that'll be nice. My car's been dead for 6 months because I couldn't afford to get it fixed and some things. But as I brought up in the last video, or maybe it was the last post, one sort of thing I was very interested in was how sales would do the first week of September. Because releasing out of early access, you get what's called a visibility round, which is basically like Steam, recommends the game to other people, and like it tailors their front page, their store front page, to games it thinks that they might be interested in buying. And when you get a visibility round or a visibility boost like that, it just really ups the chances of your game getting recommended to other people. So that lasts for 30 days. That was what the majority of that big income boost was caused by. But that wore off on like the second or the third, or maybe the first. I think it's 30 days. And so last week, I was, it was possible that it would go back down to, some months I was only making like $500 a month. And those be hard times. So I kind of wanted to make sure that didn't happen, and it didn't. So that's really cool. I think it's mostly just now because there's so many more people that own the game that it's able to just organically recommend it to more of their friends, and say, hey, your friend liked this game, or people that liked this game also liked this game. That seems to be the two places where most people come across the game. And I'm getting messages all the time where people are like, how come I've never heard of your game? Oh, I never saw this, and that really is, 90% of it is just getting people to even see the game. There's just so many people on Steam and on the internet, which is why I've always been fine with the $15 price tag. It's just, if we can reach 1%, we can do this for the rest of my life. So anyway, money situation seems to be doing good. Last week was, again, a decent week of sales, to the point where this month should be enough to cover what I need and then some. So hopefully, I can be focusing some money into freelancers next month when these initial payments start coming in, without worrying too much about how that's going to hurt the bank, right? So with freelancers in mind, there's some pretty time-consuming stuff that needs to happen to bring them on board, some of which is what I have been doing for the past 2 weeks. And I just wanted to kind of make that clear. It's not that, it is slower game development right now because I'm the only one that can do anything. But this is required to build into, 3 or 4 people working on the game, even if in sort of just like a part-time environment or whatever, to get more hands working on the game. I need to put the time and effort into getting the project better organized and cleaned up so that other users, other developers can download and install the project with as little hassle as possible. It's like a 50 gigabyte project folder, full of assets, 3D, textures, and, hundreds of icons, hundreds of models, hundreds of audio files, thousands of scripts. That stuff is, I know it because I've been using it for 4 years every day. But when you try to bring someone new into that and just say, hey, go figure it out, it's really, really complicated. And I'm going to have to do that with a couple people, and they're not going to be working on everything. So it's going to be, here's this section of stuff that I want you to work with. But I'm going to definitely have to spend, at least several hours onboarding them, and getting the project ready and answering questions for them, and sort of spending more and more of my time in this sort of a managerial position. So overall, my hands-on game development time, as far as that coding and stuff, is going to be reduced, and is already reduced to some amount. But again, that is necessary to get more overall man hours put into the game, as we bring some other people on. We're already at 20 minutes. Oh, God. I do ramble a bit. So anyway, let's keep moving. But yeah, I did already mention, but I'll just reiterate that I am looking primarily to bring on, like 3 or 4 people. There's a modeler that I've used in the past. She's a girl in Sri Lanka that is just really cool. Not like super professional, AAA or anything, but just to get some more building pieces in, because she's a very competent modeler, texturer. What's that called? I forget. Anyway. And our sound guys, I haven't given them any money in like 9 months, because the audio is pretty lacking in the game. Those aren't like full-time positions. Those are like milestone things. Please make me a set of, desert-themed building pieces. Please make sounds for the monsters in the Goblin Dungeon, things like that. And then 2 more sort of short-term, but, maybe like 20, 30 hours a week kind of thing. Positions will be, or that I'm hoping to find anyway. One is a programmer for the character controller, and I'll get into that in a second. And the other is a UI, user interface designer. So to redesign the user interface from scratch, and actually draw up a new user interface, and maybe some programming. If they're not really confident programming, I can do the programming for that. But to get them to really, to get someone that's their forte, to better design, layout, plan, and draw up basically the whole UI from scratch. And then, as I mentioned, the character controller, I actually have a peer game dev buddy of mine that I mention all the time. Winterfall, the game, check it out if you have not before. But he's got a character controller programmer that has some free hours, I hear, and he's supposed to be a really competent programmer. And I am actually looking to change the way that targeting works in Solace Crafting to a system similar to World of Warcraft. And mentioning any other game at any time ever is a really dangerous thing to do. Please don't think that I am moving the game towards World of Warcraft, like in general. That's not what I'm talking about. Don't bring your jaded problems from Blizzard and World of Warcraft into the discussion here, please. Even just subconsciously in your head, because we've all got them. Me too. It's not what I mean. Just the being able to click on a monster to actually select it and show an icon. And this is I could say it's an EverQuest system. We could say just as easily, or whatever. Very common system, but so basically that you won't have to actually aim arrows and fireballs and things like that anymore. But there will be like channeling for casting spells or charging up an aimed arrow, stuff like that, where you'll have to stand still. And you will also be able to select other players so that you can heal them and buff them specifically, which will lead into grouping online, and so on and so forth. The system that we currently have is kind of a hybrid, physics and targeting like that because it uses the math that generally those MMORPGs use, where you don't actually push a button to block. It's just you've got a 16.78% chance to block, and then when a monster attacks you, that all of those maths get rolled against to see what actually happens. So that's generally how the targeted systems work, where you've got a target, monsters have a target, they're doing something, they have to be in certain range for the attacks, etc. But it's not really about actually aiming your shots or, doing like a physics check to see if your sword was actually able to hit them or anything like that. So it's definitely got some minor downfalls, mostly just for people that did kind of enjoy aiming fireballs and stuff like that, because that is kind of fun. But it's also very fidgety, and like, for example, you may have noticed fireballs actually come out of the camera because it's difficult to make it come out of the player but actually go towards your cursor and not run into the rock that's right in front of you, and this and that and this and that. So I am looking to move that towards the way that World of Warcraft combat and targeting and things works. But yeah, those are the two major freelance positions that I am looking to hire, and I'm not looking via this video for people to message me for work. That's not at all what I mean. It's just I use a professional service that it's very legally binding and all of that. But anyway, yeah, so where'd the survey go? I hadn't opened it yet. Let's open this up, and I'll just go ahead and show this. Little sloppy here, but maybe we can move over to the side a bit like this. I think I lost one of these. There we go. Let's bring you over here. So basically, I closed the survey and gathered up all the numbers. There is a bug in my drink. Get out of my drink. I'm not going to let it stop me from drinking my drink, but I got him out of there. We had 5 major questions, and again, there was the open-ended, is there anything you would like to say? And did get quite a few responses from that as well. These are not the direct numbers. Here are the numbers if you want to look at them. What would you like to see more of? More types of weapons, armor, and equipment. Please don't sit on me right now, cat. And then this was don't want to see more, don't carry the way, and this was definitely want to see more. And what I did was I took, I gave these a weight of 0.5, these a weight of 0.2, and this a weight of 0, but then divided the total results. It's this one actually. By, or rather multiplied by 1 divided by this number. So the more in the middle, the less weight the others are all given, resulting in these graphs that show that in general, people were not actually interested in more types of resources, and by far and above were mostly interested in, maybe I could zoom in on this a little more, more encounter types. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in kind of my explanation of future goals with the game and all. More spells and ability. There have been quite a few people asking for the classes to get implemented, and definitely interested in doing that, and even some more long-term goals beyond just the classes as well. And as I mentioned, more types of buildings, basically more building skins. We've kind of just got the wood and the stone right now, and it's just difficult to make really cool looking buildings in the desert, in the swamp, in the mountains, in the caves. So definitely want to get more building skins and some things like that in for sure. And more recipes and more resources are just kind of always going to be slowly added into the game over time as encounters get more difficult. We'll want to have more recipes and drops and things related to that and resources related to those. So these really aren't priority in any case. They're just kind of always going to be more and more of these, kind of regardless, because that's just kind of how the game works. What bothers you the most? This is the 0 line, so this shows that really nobody, for the most part, was extremely bothered by something. Overall, in the numbers by general, most things were like, this doesn't bother me at all. -1 would be everybody saying this system is totally fine. So the audio actually kind of surprised me a bit here. I thought, because there is a lack of audio, definitely with when you're hitting cows or monsters or whatever, there is a very real lack of audio that I definitely want to improve. And it does add to the quality certainly, but this was actually the least voted. Audio is not bothering people for the most part. For the most part, it was voted the combat, enemy AI, and animations. And animations we knew about, definitely. Especially the player animations, people have complained about that a fair amount. And that goes into the character controller primarily, getting that really worked out nicely. And the enemy AI is also related to that, of course. It's how monsters move during attacks, and so we'll want to have them be doing like charged attacks and things like that as well, improving them not scooching constantly to try and get closer to you, giving them more of a dead weight sort of a scale, where if they're within this range, like if they're out of range, they'll try to get within a meter of you, but then they'll still be considered within range as long as they're within 1.5 meters of you, so they're not doing the scooch. And little things like that just to make combat feel more fluid and less hitchy. And then, of course, the user interface, that's been, a problem of mine since day one. It's just not something I'm any good at personally, so hopefully that will be pretty cool. Maybe in 3-6 months. Not sure how long it will take to really implement a revamp of that, but looking forward to it. Which is a little weird because I've never really had anybody work on something so involved as like redoing the UI completely, because I'm gonna have to be kind of hands off and just say cool, because I'm not, it's just not something I'm good at, or can really say, no, you should do more of this or that, and of course I'll be looking at things as it goes and, adding my 2 cents, but I'm for the most part expecting to kind of just trust their judgment and, and keep the community updated and see what people think and stuff, but gonna have to be just kind of accepting to some degree of however that comes out. Combat controls, that is also the controller we're talking about. Yeah, actually movement controls was less than combat controls, but anyway, what do you enjoy the most? This was also a bit surprising to me too, achievements. I thought achievements were a nice sort of alternative to the tutorials in letting people know there are things to do out in the world. Here's, did you know there was silver? You could get a little bonus to silver. One thing that I did fix yesterday was actually that a lot of the achievements were just saying wisdom plus 0.2, when actually there's a wide variety of different things that all the achievements reward. So I fixed that yesterday. It's not patched in yet, but that is a much more interesting system than just everything giving you a little bit more wisdom. But obviously exploring is number one here. And who would have guessed it? Crafting. We do very much enjoy crafting, and I think there is still a lot left to be explored down the avenue of crafting mechanics. We've kind of got our multi-dimensional system already of materials, tiers, levels, rarities, enchants, so forth. There's lots of different ways to make any single item actually a lot better than the base recipe. But I still think that there is a lot of ways to expand on that. One thing that often comes to mind when I think about this is Path of Exile. And they have a very complicated array of systems that goes into their item creation, the skill gems, slotting, sockets, and all of that is very complicated. But there's some really innovative stuff in there as well, I think, that can be learned from and grown upon. And, initially back in 2017, when I was just planning Solace Crafting, I actually wanted to make the game skills based on a word system, so that you would have like fire, ice, or lightning as like a suffix that you could add to a skill, so that you would have these, which is, it's kind of like Path of Exile. Say you've got, they have like support gems that add lightning damage to your slash attack, and so it'd be kind of a system like that, where anyway, that's what I wanted to do initially, but realized it was going to be very difficult for me to do that by myself. And I'm not necessarily saying that that's the direction that I want to take things, but just that I do think that there is still a lot to be explored down the path of crafting and the malleable recipe system that we've got implemented. And of course, exploration. I want to get into this quite a bit in the next section, part 5, my sort of long-term goals. But this is really what the game is all about. So yeah, I'm going to talk about this quite a bit here in just a second. But yeah, and lastly, we had how do you feel about the price of the game? Most people felt that it was just about right, maybe a little cheap. And I, like I said earlier in the video, I agree with this. I think when the game gets better, there will be a day that it will be worth $20. There might be a day where it'll be worth $25 or even $30. But right now, I think $15 is a fair price. If we can reach, like 100,000 people, that's a lot of money. If I could sell 100,000 copies at $15, that's fine. It doesn't have to be $60, and the game is not worth $60 right now. So I think it's fair to say that someday that the price might move up as the quality of the game and the content of the game goes up over time. But right now, I think this is a fair price. So I agree with this in general. I'm going to take some sip of cola. I don't really talk at these lengthy sessions other than when I make videos, so my throat always gets really dry when I do this. But yeah, that is the survey. Let's see if I can close that. And wanted to get into the long-term goals a bit. And so I've got actually a little picture here. This is from the new Amazon series, The Rings of Power. I enjoyed this series. They've only got 3 episodes out so far. I thought it was really cool. Elves, magic, you gotta love it. But there's this shot here in the series, and if you watch the series, this is a panning, moving shot that's just absolutely gorgeous. And I don't know if this is real. I know the original Lord of the Rings series, a lot of it was shot in New Zealand with their beautiful mountains like this. But I wanted to show this just because these are the kind of shots and scenery that just really, I don't know, something about them, they just make me happy. It's just, I love these kinds of landscapes. And this is the kind of actually environment that I live in. I've got mountains on 3 sides of me, and we're down in a valley. And this is just something that I've always wanted to recreate in Solace Crafting somehow, some way. And, of course, the game looks nothing like this right now. And there's no way to make it look like this because it is fully procedural. Like if you play Skyrim, there's some pretty cool scenes, some spots where you can get up on the mountains. You can see way off in the distance, but that is all, it's called baked in game development because it's predetermined. The game knows it's there and it can super, what's the word? I don't know. The English is failing me right now, but it can prepare all of that data so that it knows when you're, 5 kilometers away, it can draw it at really low resolution, and not worry about it because it knows you're so far away. Or when you're behind this mountain, it just won't render it at all because it doesn't need to. It knows you can't see it and save on that processing power. You can't do that in Solace Crafting because everything is generated in runtime. You can't have stuff constantly processing data to say, let's make 8 different versions of the mountains depending on the distance that the player's at. And there's a lot of ways to improve on how the game currently is, but even with something like Rust, when you make a new world, it pre-generates a lot of that data. It spends a couple minutes generating the world and all those maps that it needs, saving them, and then using that data as you move around throughout it. And we just don't have that luxury in Solace Crafting, because you can start at 0 and just run for an hour and get, maybe get out 20 kilometers in one direction, and it just has to keep building the world around you as you go. It can't say, hold on, give me a couple minutes. I'm just going to get everything looking good here for you. We don't have that luxury, so it's never going to look like this, but I really want to try and improve the large scale graphics quite a bit more. One of the systems that I do have implemented, but is kind of turned off because it just wasn't really ever finished, is distant encounters. So like if you've got on your map, like say you've got a dungeon that's 3 kilometers, maybe you're up here, and then down here there's a lava cave or something. Right now it's not going to draw, but I do actually have a system that, because that's all noise based, like that's how the map works. It just checks the noise and says, yeah, there's going to be a cave there. The game engine that draws these long distance terrains also, of course, has access to that data, and so can say, oh, there's supposed to be a mine here, and draw, to scale really low res version of the mine. So you can actually stand up the mountains and say, oh, hey, it looks like there's something down there. When you start getting into things like trees, little patches of trees, that's really difficult. You could try and fake a little bit of forest, but then if you actually walk down towards the forest while you're looking at it, there's going to be some point where all of a sudden it's just going to be, completely different, and it's going to have to change, and you're going to see this fake. And someone's calling my phone. I'll be right back. Sorry, I had a phone call. Yeah, so it's difficult to get that kind of stuff. But then, in the game, we do have like big rocks that spawn, and we would be able to do low res versions of that and some things like that. And that is kind of one of the things that I have talked about with some peers that I am definitely interested in improving. And this actually kind of goes back to World of Warcraft. And again, I apologize for using anything as an example. Please don't get it mixed up too deeply. But something that the original vanilla World of Warcraft was really good about was making visible landmarks, which is a problem with the game currently. Like when you're down in the forest, there's just so many trees and plants and rocks and stuff that you can walk for 4 minutes in one direction, and it's just so chaotic. It's like you don't really know, have you moved? Where were you? There's nothing really around most times to orient yourself off of. And so I hope to improve that over time, basically reducing the overall chaos, the clutter, and then adding more sort of bigger items. So you can, whether it's like a big rock or, like a big tower like this would be really cool. something that really sticks out in the landscape every so often, so that you can see that in the distance, and then even if you walk 10 minutes in one direction, you can then say, oh, now that's over there, and still have kind of your different things in the world to take your bearings off of. And I was pointing at this tower here while I was talking about it, but I had changed the screen. Sorry about that. But you know what I mean. Big rocks like this, big towers here and there, maybe a big tree every once in a while, and just overall less chaos. But what I really wanted to talk about kind of goes back to what we were looking at in the survey with the exploration and encounters. Those were two of the things that were voted up the most. And so I wanted to talk about my sort of long-term goals related to those two things. And I wanted to do so kind of, the video is already like 45 minutes long. This is going to be a little bit lengthy, but anyway. So I just wanted to explain real quick kind of how the world generation works as is, and how that is intended to evolve into these systems. So currently we have what's called a chunk in the game, which is 8 kilometers squared. And then within that 8 kilometers squared chunk, you've got 64 terrains, or I also call them sections. So, 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers, that is 8 by 8 is 64 terrains within a chunk, right? Now, currently, for example, we only allow one floating island to spawn per chunk, right? So there's these layers of logic that the game generation goes through when it generates the game world. So when a chunk save file is being generated for the first time as you move around the world, the first thing that it does is check to see where that floating isle is going to be, because that's the one most important, not most important, but that's the highest priority thing that needs to exist. There's only going to be one of them. So first it rolls across the 64 terrains to see where that floating island is going to be, and then it removes that terrain from the encounter rolls. Hi, kitty. So the other 63 terrains are then all going to say, well, what encounter do you have? And so that can be, an undead dungeon, a water cave, or, the different large encounters that we have now. Those are all one per terrain, right? Hi, kitty. And I've also been working on NPC towns. They're not quite working as intended yet, so they were turned off. But my vision long term is to have in a chunk one city. And that city, so again, we've got these layers of logic that we're going through for generating everything that's in the chunk, right? So the city gets generated first, and we ignore the outer edges. So there's that drops it down to 6 by 6. There's 36 possible terrains then for the NPC town to spawn in. And then once that NPC town is generated, it starts generating stories. And these are basically like the quests of the chunk. So say the NPC city is over here, and then there's a goblin dungeon over here. Those two things can be fully aware of one another. So maybe say you're coming up from this direction and you come across the goblin mine, but the door is barred and locked. And, you're just like, oh, well, okay, I can't open that. Then you find the town, and someone in the town says, maybe there's like a quest or two that they want you to do first. And eventually they're like, we've got this key that opens up that goblin dungeon, but we had to seal it off because it was such trouble, or whatever. And then you go into the goblin dungeon and you defeat the goblin boss, and you bring back his shoulder pads, and then they give you a fancy reward. Of course, this is the quest hub way of doing things, which admittedly is outdated and kind of gross, but it does still have its definite uses and viability in a game like Solace Crafting, again, for that story generation. So things aren't preset in the world. Again, everything is procedural, and that's never going to change. But when you find a city out in the wild, it's able to direct you to other places within that chunk, just because it knows through those layers of logic of generation that it's gone through, that there is a goblin dungeon over here, there is a water cave over there, there's tower ruins, in one place, something here, something there. And when you get to those places, like say there's tower ruins and maybe you've already cleared it, but you didn't have the quest to look for something. And so when you get there, they're like, we need you to go recover this thing for us if you could. And you go back and you find it. Or maybe you did already have it in your bags and you're like, oh, you mean this? And they're like, yeah, that's it right there. Thank you. So I think that is a really great way to play into the exploration aspect of giving meaning to going to new places, and again, I mentioned that is the quest hub way of thinking of things, which is not the best way to do things, in my opinion. So the other way to go about things which is a bit superior in my opinion, is actually area-based quests. So picture, for example, that you're just, running around out in the world and you walk into a swamp. So, biomes aren't actually section or chunk based at all, but a terrain, a section can still understand that it is primarily swamp or mountain or whatever. And so say you walk into that swamp and like a little quest notification pops up that says you hear a scream in the distance, for example. And, or maybe to the northwest. And so you keep going to the northwest and you find, a guy's tied up to a dead tree asking for help, and that they've, left him there to be sacrificed to the undead that show up at night or something like that. These kinds of things that are not based out of a quest hub. So you're not, the worst thing about quest hubs is that they start in a position, but they want you to go somewhere else. And then usually they want you to go back as well. And one way that I think that we can alleviate that a bit is to have the NPC towns actually have solaces in them that are kind of like public solaces. So you can teleport back to them. And we could actually even do a spell, like maybe it's an achievement-based spell where after you've done 5 NPC quests, you unlock a spell that says Town Recall, and it will recall you to whatever the nearest town is. So whatever town exists for the chunk that you're currently adventuring in, assuming you found the NPC village, it'll just teleport you back there. So you don't have to, it's like go kill 5 boars, and then, you kill 5 boars, and then you got to walk back. That's just the worst gaming experience that there is in RPGs, and it's still super common, used all the time, and I hate it. That's like the main reason I don't like New World, is because you're just running all over the place for hours. And so I want to make sure that that is not something that turns into a repetitive walk fest. But I do think that there is a lot of story to be built off of having a quest hub, but then there is also a lot of fun to be had in just you walking into some ruins, killing a skeleton that drops a broken haft of an axe that's got an inscription on it, and that starts the quest. It says, find, the hilt guard to this sword, or find out the source of this glowing red voodoo doll, whatever. Just things that crop up out in the world as you're moving around that don't want you to say, go walk 20 minutes away from here just so that you can walk 20 minutes back. They're that location based. And I think that we can get a quest journal that supports that as well, and a map system that supports that as well. So, for example, say you hear the scream in the swamp, but you haven't yet found where the scream originated from, and you leave the area. Then that just drops out of your quest book because you're not there anymore. But then say maybe you open your map up, and the map, I think in the future, will actually have borders around the terrains and the chunks to show this is a chunk, this is a section, and then maybe you can click on that and it'll show you, there are quests here that you have touched on but have not yet finished. So if you wanted to, you could go back to the swamp, and then that quest would just pop back into your area quest log in your journal. It's not something that would have to exist there permanently, or be a part of your currently accepted list of 700 quests. It would just be, if you're there, this is available to you, and if you leave, there is still a system available for you to look back and say, there was a quest there, maybe I'll go and check that out. So again, I think it should be very much up to the player, to what they want to engage in, but that there should be a lot of content out there in the world. And I think that will also work out really great in the long run for modding communities to just be able to write quest chains like that. Even if it's just the text and the reward, and to have the mayor of a town say, put you on this string of quests to find his missing daughter, and then it turns out she joined a cult, and it turns out, whatever. And sort of even longer term than that, I think it would be really cool to have, maybe even above chunks, which are 8 kilometers, maybe then there's even a bigger, a sector or something where maybe it's 3x3 chunks, and then the chunk in the middle of each sector actually has a castle. And castles have kind of even some different stuff. It's not a village, it's a castle. And there's like a lord, and there's some more advanced quests there that lead to other dimensions. And I personally would like to have class-specific quests, class-specific rewards. I always thought that was a really cool part of some of the games like EverQuest and World of Warcraft, where you've got your druid epic item or weapon or whatever, it's like, and it's this long quest where they need you to go do this, and then they need you to go do that, but the rewards are things that you can't get a hold of otherwise out in the world. So video is probably like an hour long by now. I'm just going to try and cut it off here, but I could ramble on, and I'm kind of losing my voice talking for an hour straight. But I did kind of want to touch on some of that's where I hope to be moving towards things. We're just kind of working on bug fixing and quality of life at the moment for the most part, and getting ready for hopefully bringing on some new hands as far as development goes. But over time, as things get better, that is sort of the direction that I hope to be moving things in. More NPC town quest exploration encounter systems, and of course expanding upon the current player generated or player constructed town systems. So let me know what you think. Sorry I have not been able to devote 8 hours a day to bug fixing the past couple weeks. I'm kind of trying to focus on doing that this week primarily, and then probably going to have to shift back to doing like half and half next week and this and that. But I am here working away. Sorry if I haven't read everything in Discord or Steam or wherever. There's a lot of stuff still going on. But big thanks to everyone that is posting bugs and suggestions and all of that. I love you guys. Um, I need to stop. Thanks for listening. Hope you're doing well. And I will be back shortly.